You ready to start off with Tre Jones?
I'm ready. You want me to go first, or do you want to take him?
Well, here, we're going to bring this up, and I am going to bring up his stats real quick, just so we can have a little bit
Mm,
of a different look here um, and have something to go off of. So here is Tre Jones, obviously, was coming off the bench to start the season, and we saw how that went. And then after we made the lineup change, moved him back into the starting lineup, moved Jeremy to the four, I think both of those guys' games definitely improved. But I'll dish it to you to start, Ethan. Just obviously, there was the beginning of the season, which is why I threw in that note. But then at the same time, we've seen a lot of positives from him kind of since he's been moved back to the starting lineup. So
yeah.
if you want to jump into strengths first or
Yeah.
weaknesses or just all of it, you give your thoughts on Tre so far.
I think he's had a great start to the season. Strengths: our best playmaker, our really only true natural point guard. Plays very well next to Wembanyama. Was probably the first guy to throw him consistent lobs. I think that's becoming contagious with the rest of the team. Devin Vassell primarily, but he's really like the root in that area of the court. And then just he's able to make the right play always, whether that be taking an open floater or taking it all the way to the basket, pushing the pace and getting easy layups in transition. He really is minimal when it comes to mistakes. And in terms of weaknesses, I mean, he struggled a little bit at the very beginning of the year coming off the bench. We talked about that at length because he was really the only ball handler in that bench unit to start the season. And Malachi Branham did not start as hot as we had hoped he would. So a lot of that responsibility was on Tre. So every statistical category kind of took a little bit of a dip for him. But we've seen all of that turn around once he was inserted into the starting lineup with the big guns. And then, of course, just 3-point shooting. It's been on an upward tick. He's at 28.4% on the season so far. I think that's improved since moving into the starting lineup as well, but still not a great percentage. You'd hope that your starting point guard could hit at least mid 30s. So that obviously needs to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously echo a lot of what you said, but just to give my thoughts, facilitation, like you said, he's our best playmaker. He sets guys up the best. I feel like one of the strengths of this team, just in our youthfulness, is our transition game.
Yeah.
And when he is at the head of the table playing that point guard position, kind of as the chess master, if you will, in transition, he is by far the best architect, I guess you could say, if that word usage makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, he gets guys in their run lanes. He's able to find guys. We've obviously seen, like you mentioned at the beginning, the emphasis that he has put on Wemby. Him getting the ball to Wemby came most naturally to him. And I
Mm.
think once we moved him into the starting lineup, we've seen that kind of trickle down to the rest of the team. You've seen other guys emphasizing it more, kind of since he's really taken the reins in that starting position. When it comes to his weaknesses, I don't know if necessarily they're ever going to. I don't know, how do I put this? I hate to say it this way. I don't know if these things are necessarily. I don't know if they're already capped or if maybe he can improve on them. But sometimes defensively against, there's just a certain, Tre has a certain ceiling, and he's not going to be able to go one on one in isolation against most all star guards. Those guys are going to get him. That's not to say that he's not a serviceable player or a valuable player on this team or still a very solid NBA player. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at his brother, who's all of those things as well, he's somebody who also gets taken advantage of, against all star guards. There's other all star guards who aren't the greatest defensively who also get taken advantage of. But if you do have to point out weaknesses, that would be one thing. Really, defense and shooting are the things that stand out to me whenever it comes to things that Tre can improve on moving forward in his career.
Mm.
But the other thing that I would say that just kind of happens from time to time that kind of goes in hand with his playmaking, I would say, is sometimes there'll just be errant passes. I don't know if it's maybe sometimes it's not even completely his fault. Um, and this was definitely much more prevalent when he was on the bench, but I still see it from time to time. There'll just be a turnover here and there. But as much as I'm criticizing that, Ethan, as I'm talking about it, um, every even all-star level players do that from time to time. So really, the more I'm thinking about it when I'm mentioning the turnover here and there, um, that was really something that stood out more on the bench than the starting unit. But yeah, obviously his facilitation, I would say his finishing ability at the rim, not necessarily in his floaters, but I've seen a lot of layups through contact or just highly contested layups at the rim where he's been able to contort himself and use the acrobat badge, if you will, to get around guys and finish at the rim. Um, and I mean, really, it's kind of when I think about the rest of his offensive game, like kind of in the mid range, it's really the same story that we've been talking about for a couple years here, Ethan. Just consistency on the floater is the only thing that I would criticize, but still, overall, I would say a very solid season for Tre. And if we didn't have him on the roster, um, we're 10-40 right now. We might be closer down to the Pistons if we didn't have him on the team this year, Ethan, whenever it comes to wins.
Yeah. I mean, for real, off the bench, his stats were basically 8 points per game, 5 assists, and a 1.5 turnovers. But as a starter, he's averaging basically 13, 7, and only 1 turnover a game. Um, so everything, and then 37% from 3 as a starter, which I did not realize. So limited sample size, obviously, but in 16 games, that's pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. And just to touch on some of the comments that are in here, Aaliyah says, "Where do I get that hat?" Well, here is a QR code. If you want to check out some of our merch, you can scan the QR code on your phone to support the show, but you can also go to the link in our bio and the description below of today's episode to go to our spread shop and get whatever gear you would like. We appreciate it. It is not a must, but if you would like to and feel compelled, we would
Mm,
greatly appreciate it. But also, she says that Tre Jones is super important to this team. We a whole mess without him, lol. That's
true.
definitely what we saw earlier in the season. And then blah, blah, blah says Tre's best improvement has been his ability to do less. He often went for bad shots before, like floaters, but now he does less and takes shots at the rim or wide open threes and focuses on passing. And I think that kind of ties into another theme that we've been talking about since the lineup change, Ethan. And
Mhm.
that's that when Tre has more, talent around him,
Yeah.
that just helps his game so much more. He's able to facilitate more. He's not passing off to Malachi, who sometimes doesn't know when to cut, or maybe isn't as connected. That's another term there, Ethan, that we've talked about throughout this season. That the starting lineup feels a lot more connected
Yeah.
with Tre in there, and he definitely has what's the word? He is not forced things as much as maybe you could say he had to try to do on the bench.
Mm, and you could honestly say he's been the catalyst for everyone else figuring each other out too. Like him just being there has allowed Devin and Keldon, Jeremy, and Wemby to kind of grow into themselves and playing with each other as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that wraps up my thoughts on Tre Jones, Ethan.
Who knew Trey Jones would have such a long midseason breakdown? It took like 10 minutes.